Imagine sleeping on your living room couch for 8 months straight while strangers sleep in your bed. Imagine enduring back pain, humiliation, and the loss of privacy in your own home, all to save $4,500 for a single gift. Now imagine finally achieving that impossible goal, only to watch it literally flushed down a toilet by someone else's undisciplined child while their parent shrugs it off as no big deal. This is not a nightmare. This is the true story of Robert Chen, a 41-year-old man from Portland, Oregon, who sacrificed his dignity and comfort for months to make his wife's lifelong dream come true, only to have it destroyed in minutes by family members who showed no remorse. How much of yourself would you sacrifice for the person you love? And what would you do if your own family destroyed that sacrifice without a second thought? Stay with us, because this story will make you question the limits of love, the meaning of family loyalty, and the price we pay for dreams. Robert Chen had always considered himself a practical man. At 41 years old, he managed a mid-sized hardware store in southeast Portland, a job that paid $42,000 a year before taxes. It was not glamorous work, but it was steady, honest, and Robert took pride in helping customers solve their home repair problems. He had worked his way up from stock clerk to assistant manager to store manager over 12 years with the same company. His wife, Claire, 39 years old, taught 4th grade at a public elementary school in the Beaverton district, making $38,000 annually. Together they earned $80,000 before taxes, which sounded decent until you factored in Portland's rising cost of living, their mortgage on a modest 3-bedroom house in the Lentz neighborhood, car payments, utilities, groceries, and the dozen other expenses that consumed every paycheck. They had been married for 15 years, having met at a mutual friend's barbecue when Robert was 26 and Claire was 24. Their relationship had always been built on genuine affection, shared humor, and mutual respect, rather than grand romantic gestures or expensive dates. They were the kind of couple who spent Friday nights watching rented movies and eating takeout on their couch, perfectly content in each other's company. They had no children, not by choice initially, but because fertility treatments had proven too expensive and emotionally draining after 3 failed attempts. Eventually, they had made peace with being childless, focusing instead on their careers, their friends, and each other. Claire had always been passionate about history and antiques. She loved visiting estate sales, vintage shops, and antique markets, not to buy expensive items, but simply to look and imagine the stories behind old objects. Her small collection consisted mostly of inexpensive finds, vintage teacups, old postcards, Depression-era glassware. But there was one piece she talked about constantly, a piece that represented not just history but personal loss and longing, her grandmother's Omega Constellation watch from 1952. Claire's grandmother, Margaret, had been the most important person in her childhood. Margaret had raised Claire from age 7 to 12 after Claire's parents divorced messily, and her mother struggled with addiction. Those 5 years living with her grandmother in a small house in Eugene, Oregon, had been Claire's only stable childhood memories. Margaret had been kind, patient, and had encouraged Claire's love of learning. She had worn the same watch every single day, an elegant Omega Constellation with a distinctive Paipan dial, rose gold case, and leather strap. Claire remembered watching her grandmother wind that watch each morning at the kitchen table while they ate breakfast together. When Claire was 12, Margaret died suddenly from a stroke. Claire's mother, desperate for money and emotionally unstable, had sold off most of Margaret's possessions within weeks, including the Omega watch. Claire, just a child, had no say in the matter. She had begged her mother to keep the watch, offering to take care of it, promising she would never ask for anything else. Her mother had dismissed her pleas, saying they needed money more than sentimental objects. The watch was sold to a local pawn shop for $300, a fraction of its actual value, Claire had never forgiven her mother for that. Even now, 27 years later, the loss of that watch represented everything Claire had lost. Her grandmother, her childhood stability, the one person who had truly loved her unconditionally. Over the years, Claire had searched occasionally for similar Omega Constellation watches from that era, browsing online auction sites and visiting antique stores whenever they traveled. But authentic pieces from 1952 in good condition commanded serious prices, typically between $4,000 and $6,000. For a couple living paycheck to paycheck, it was impossible. Claire had accepted this reality with sadness, but resignation. Some dreams were simply not meant to be. Then, in January, Robert had been in Seattle for a hardware industry conference. During a free afternoon, he had wandered into a high-end antique store in the Pike Place market area, just browsing to kill time. In a locked display case, he saw it. An Omega Constellation from 1952, rose gold case, pie pan dial, nearly identical to the one in the few photographs Claire had of her grandmother. Robert asked the shop owner about it. The watch was authentic, serviced and running perfectly, priced at $4,500. Robert took photos of the watch and the documentation, thanked the owner, and left with his heart pounding. That night in his hotel room, Robert compared the photos he had taken with the pictures Claire kept of her grandmother. It was not just similar. It was virtually identical, down to the small scratch near the 6 o'clock position on the case. Robert could not be certain it was the exact same watch that had belonged to Margaret, but the possibility existed. Even if it was not the exact watch, it was the same model, the same year, the same everything. Giving this to Claire would be like giving her a piece of her grandmother back. But $4,500 might as well have been $45,000 for Robert and Claire. After paying their monthly expenses, they typically had less than $200 left over, which usually got absorbed by unexpected costs like car repairs or medical copays. Robert lay awake that night doing math in his head. If he could save $500 per month somehow, it would take 9 months. But where would he find an extra $500 monthly? Then Robert thought about their house. 3 bedrooms, but they only used 2. Their bedroom and a small guest room that hosted visitors maybe twice a year. Could they rent out a room? Robert dismissed the idea initially. Long-term renters meant background checks, leases, dealing with someone living in their space permanently. But short-term rentals, like Airbnb. Robert pulled up the app on his phone and searched Portland listings similar to what they could offer. Private room in a house, shared bathroom, quiet neighborhood. Comparable listings were charging $80 to $120 per night. If Robert could rent their guest room just a few nights per week, he could potentially make $500 to $600 monthly. But there was a problem. Claire would notice. She would ask questions. And if Robert told her the truth about why he was doing it, she would never allow him to go through with it. Claire would say the watch was not worth the inconvenience, that they did not need strangers in their home, that she had made peace with not having it. Robert knew his wife well enough to know she would refuse. So Robert made a decision. He would rent out the guest room during the weekdays when Claire was at work, and during the occasional weekends when Claire attended teaching conferences out of town. He would not rent the guest room, he would rent their bedroom, and he would not tell Claire anything. Robert set up the Airbnb listing in early February. He took flattering photos of their master bedroom, which was the larger and nicer of the 2 bedrooms, with better furniture and an ensuite bathroom that would appeal to guests. He priced it at $85 per night, competitive but not suspiciously cheap. He set his calendar to only accept bookings during specific times when he knew Claire would be out late at school meetings or staying overnight for teacher training workshops that occurred monthly. The listing went live on a Tuesday. By Thursday, Robert had his first booking for the following Monday night. That Monday, after Claire left for work at 7 in the morning, Robert went into hypercleaning mode. He stripped their bed completely, washed all the linens, remade the bed with their nicest sheets. He cleared all personal items from the bedroom and bathroom, hiding Claire's jewelry box, family photos, and anything else that would make it obvious people lived there. He vacuumed, dusted, cleaned the bathroom until it gleamed. The guest was scheduled to arrive at 3 in the afternoon, and Claire would not be home until after 9 because she had a curriculum planning meeting after school. Robert left work early, met the guest, a middle-aged business traveler named Stephen, gave him the keys and instructions, and then left to grab dinner alone at a nearby restaurant to kill time. When he returned home at 8:30, Stephen was in the bedroom. Robert spent the night on their living room couch, which was not designed for sleeping. The cushions were too soft, creating awkward angles. Robert's back ached by morning. When Claire came home at 9:15, she found Robert on the couch watching television. She asked if he was feeling okay. Robert lied smoothly, saying he had a headache and the bedroom felt stuffy, so he decided to watch TV in the living room for a while. Claire accepted this without suspicion, kissed him goodnight, and went to bed in their guest room since Robert was occupying the couch. Robert felt terrible lying to her, but reminded himself this was all for her dream. Over the following months, Robert developed a careful system. He tracked Claire's schedule obsessively, booking Airbnb guests only when he knew she would be away or busy late. He became expert at rapid cleaning and setting up the room. He developed backstories and excuses for why he was sleeping on the couch. He had been watching a late-night movie and fallen asleep there. He did not want to wake Claire, who had gone to bed early. He was working on his laptop and lost track of time. Claire occasionally expressed concern that Robert seemed tired or that his back was bothering him. Robert always deflected, saying he was fine, just work stress. The guests varied wildly. Some were perfectly pleasant, quiet business travelers who checked in late and left early, barely making an impact. Others were problematic. In March, Robert hosted a couple in their 20s who were in Portland for a concert. They had loud, obviously sexual encounters in Robert and Claire's bed that Robert could hear from the living room couch, making him deeply uncomfortable in his own home. When they checked out, Robert found used condoms in the bedroom trash can and stains on the sheets that required extra washing. He felt humiliated and violated, but needed the money. In April, a man in his 30s checked in who seemed normal initially, but smoked marijuana in the bedroom, despite Robert's strict no-smoking policy. The smell permeated their curtains and carpet. Robert had to buy odor eliminators and air out the room for 2 days, terrified Claire would notice the smell. When Claire commented that the house smelled like something herbal, Robert claimed he had been trying out a new cleaning product. Another guest, a woman traveling for work, turned out to be a petty thief who stole several of Claire's expensive bath products that Robert had forgotten to hide. Robert had to replace them before Claire noticed they were missing. The physical toll was worse than Robert had anticipated. Sleeping on the couch 2 to 3 nights per week for months destroyed his back. By May, Robert was waking up with shooting pains down his legs and chronic stiffness in his lower back. He bought a foam topper for the couch, which helped minimally. He started taking ibuprofen daily. His sleep quality deteriorated, leaving him exhausted at work. His boss commented that Robert seemed distracted and tired, asking if everything was all right at home. Robert lied again, saying he was fine. The emotional toll was perhaps worse than the physical. Robert felt like a stranger in his own home. He resented the guests even though they were paying him. He resented having to hide parts of his life. He especially hated lying to Claire, the person he loved most in the world, every single day. There were moments when Robert almost quit, almost told Claire everything and abandoned the plan. But then he would think about her face when she talked about her grandmother, the sadness in her eyes when she saw similar watches online that they could not afford. He thought about how much joy this gift would bring her. Those thoughts kept him going through the exhaustion and discomfort. By June, Robert had saved $2,400. He was halfway there. By August, After 8 grueling months of sacrifice, secrecy, and sleeping on the couch dozens of nights, Robert had saved $4,600. He had done it. He immediately called the antique shop in Seattle. The watch was still available. Robert arranged to drive up the following Saturday, a 5-hour round trip, to purchase it in person. He wanted to inspect it carefully, ensure it was authentic and in the condition advertised. Claire thought he was going to Seattle for a hardware vendor meeting. Robert met with the shop owner, an elderly gentleman named Harold, who had owned the store for 40 years. Harold walked Robert through the watch's provenance, showed him documentation of its authenticity, demonstrated that it kept perfect time. The watch was beautiful, elegant, clearly well cared for despite its age. The rose gold case caught the light gorgeously. The leather strap had been replaced with a period-appropriate vintage strap in excellent condition. Robert held the watch carefully, imagining Claire's grandmother wearing this exact piece decades ago. Whether or not this was Margaret's actual watch did not matter anymore. It was the same model, the same year, the same connection to the past. Robert paid Harold $4,500 in cash, money he had withdrawn from his secret savings account that morning. Harold packed the watch carefully in an elegant vintage watch box with documentation. Robert drove home with the box on his passenger seat, feeling pride and relief that his ordeal was finally over. Robert and Claire's 16th wedding anniversary was September 23rd, just 2 weeks away. Robert planned to give Claire the watch then, making it a double celebration. He hid the watch box in their master bathroom, tucked in the back of the linen closet behind towels where Claire would never look. Every day he checked to make sure it was still there, still safe. He could barely contain his excitement. After 8 months of sacrifice and suffering, he was about to make his wife's dream come true. September 23rd fell on a Saturday, perfect timing for their anniversary celebration. Robert had planned a nice but modest dinner at home, Claire's preference since she had never been comfortable with expensive restaurants. Robert bought good steaks, fresh vegetables, a bottle of wine they both liked, and ingredients for Claire's favorite dessert, chocolate lava cake. He planned to cook dinner himself, something he did rarely but Claire always appreciated. The watch would be his surprise after dessert, the grand finale to their evening. That Saturday morning, Robert and Claire slept in late, a rare luxury. They had coffee together on their back patio, enjoying the pleasant September weather Portland was known for, sunny but not too hot, with a gentle breeze carrying the smell of late-blooming roses from their neighbor's garden. Claire was in a wonderful mood, happy and relaxed. They talked about maybe taking a weekend trip to the coast next month, something they had not done in years due to money constraints. Robert smiled and agreed, thinking that after today he could finally stop doing Airbnb, stop sleeping on the couch, stop lying. His back pain would improve, his life would return to normal. Everything was going to be perfect. Then, at 11:30 in the morning, Robert's phone rang. It was his cousin Martin. Robert felt his stomach drop. Martin only called when he wanted something: money, favors, or a place to crash. Martin was 45, 4 years older than Robert, and had spent his entire adult life bouncing between dead-end jobs, failed relationships, and questionable decisions. Martin had been married briefly in his 20s, which produced a son named Ethan, now 6 years old. Martin's ex-wife had primary custody because Martin was unreliable, unemployed half the time, and lived in a cramped studio apartment in North Portland that was barely suitable for himself, much less a child. But Martin had Ethan every other weekend, court-ordered visitation that Martin complied with inconsistently. Martin's voice on the phone was overly cheerful, which meant he wanted something. He explained that he had Ethan for the weekend, and they were in the area, and thought they would stop by to say hello to Robert and Claire. Robert knew this was nonsense. Martin lived 20 minutes away, and there was no reason for him to be in Robert's neighborhood unless he was deliberately coming to their house. Robert wanted to say no, to tell Martin that today was not a good day, that it was their anniversary and they had plans. But family obligation and years of conditioning made Robert hesitate. Martin sensed the hesitation and pushed harder, saying it would just be a quick visit, maybe 30 minutes, and Ethan really wanted to see Uncle Robert and Aunt Claire. Robert looked at Claire, who was reading a book peacefully on the patio, unaware of the phone conversation. Robert made a decision he would regret for the rest of his life. He told Martin they could come over for a little while, but would need to leave by early afternoon because Robert and Claire had anniversary plans. Martin agreed enthusiastically and said they would be there in 20 minutes. Robert hung up and immediately regretted his weakness. Claire looked up from her book and asked who had called. Robert explained, and Claire's face showed brief disappointment before she smiled and said it was fine. Family was family. They could spare an hour. Martin arrived 35 minutes later, not 20, in his beat-up Honda Civic that desperately needed a muffler replacement. The car announced his arrival from a block away, with its loud, rattling engine. Martin got out wearing wrinkled jeans and a faded band t-shirt, his hair uncombed, looking exactly like someone who had not really gotten his life together. From the back seat emerged Ethan, a small, wiry 6-year-old with blonde hair cut in an uneven style that suggested Martin had done it himself with scissors. Ethan immediately started running around Robert's front yard, picking up sticks and hitting the bushes with them, while Martin made no attempt to control him. Robert and Claire greeted Martin politely. Claire, ever the kind elementary school teacher, knelt down to Ethan's level and said hello, asking him about school and what grade he was in. Ethan ignored her completely, continuing to hit bushes. Martin laughed and said Ethan was full of energy today, which was Martin's way of excusing his son's lack of manners. They went inside and Martin immediately made himself comfortable on Robert's couch, complimenting the house in a tone that sounded more resentful than genuine. Martin had always been jealous of Robert's stability, his marriage, his house, his job. Martin's life had been a series of failures, and being in Robert's home reminded him of that contrast. Claire offered drinks and snacks, gracious as always. Martin accepted beer, which Robert reluctantly provided, despite it being 11 in the morning. Ethan accepted juice and cookies, which he ate while walking around the house, touching everything, leaving sticky fingerprints on furniture and walls. Martin remained glued to his phone, texting someone, completely ignoring his son's behavior. Robert watched Ethan nervously, worried the child would break something, but said nothing because he did not want to offend Martin. Claire tried multiple times to engage Ethan in conversation, asking about his favorite subjects in school, his friends, his hobbies. Ethan responded in fragments when he responded at all, mostly ignoring her. The quick visit stretched past 30 minutes, then an hour. Martin showed no signs of leaving. Instead, he kept talking about his latest failed job, his latest failed relationship, his financial struggles, occasionally making passive-aggressive comments about how Robert had it easy. Robert glanced at the clock repeatedly. It was already 1 in the afternoon. He wanted to start preparing the anniversary dinner, but more importantly, he wanted Martin and Ethan gone. Finally, Claire, sensing Robert's frustration, politely suggested that they had things to do for their anniversary. Martin, completely oblivious or deliberately ignoring the hint, said he was hungry and asked if they had anything to eat beyond cookies. Robert, trapped by his own inability to be rude to family, offered to order pizza. Martin immediately accepted. Robert ordered 2 large pizzas, knowing this would cost $40 they had not budgeted for. But at this point, he just wanted the visit to end peacefully. While waiting for the pizza, Ethan became increasingly restless and disruptive. He jumped on Robert's couch, despite Martin telling him half-heartedly to stop, He ran through the house, slamming doors. He found a permanent marker in Robert's kitchen drawer and started drawing on a piece of paper on the kitchen table, then accidentally marked the table itself, leaving a black streak that would require serious cleaning to remove. Martin barely reacted, just said, "Ethan, be careful, buddy," without enforcing any consequences. The pizza arrived. They ate in uncomfortable semi-silence, except for Martin talking about himself and Ethan complaining that he did not like the pizza toppings, even though Martin had not asked what Ethan wanted before Robert ordered. After eating, Martin finally seemed ready to leave. It was nearly 3 in the afternoon, and Robert's anniversary day had been thoroughly hijacked. But as Martin was gathering his things, Ethan announced he needed to use the bathroom. Claire pointed him to the main bathroom down the hall, the one attached to Robert and Claire's bedroom. Ethan ran off while Martin checked his phone. Robert began clearing pizza boxes, relieved this ordeal was almost over. Ethan was in the bathroom for longer than seemed normal for a 6-year-old. After 5 minutes, Robert began to feel uneasy. After 7 minutes, he walked down the hallway toward the bathroom and called out to Ethan, asking if he was okay. Ethan responded that he was fine. Robert heard water running and the toilet flushing multiple times, which seemed odd. He returned to the living room, trying to push down his growing anxiety. Martin remained on the couch, oblivious. After 10 minutes total, Ethan emerged from the bathroom looking completely normal. No sense of having done anything wrong. Robert went to check the bathroom, expecting to find a mess that needed cleaning. What he found was far worse than he imagined. The toilet was backing up, water rising dangerously close to the rim. On the floor next to the toilet was the vintage watch box, empty and water-damaged, lid open. Robert's heart stopped. He looked in the toilet bowl and saw nothing except rising water. Panic seized him. He ran to the linen closet and tore through the towels. The watch box had been there, hidden. Now it was on the bathroom floor, empty. Robert spun toward Ethan, who was back in the living room playing with his phone. Robert's voice came out strangled. "Ethan, did you go into the closet in the bathroom?" Ethan looked up casually. "Yeah, I was looking for toys." Robert felt his hands shaking. "There was a blue box in there. Did you take something from that box?" Ethan nodded matter-of-factly. "That little circle thing. I thought it was trash, so I threw it in the toilet." For a moment, Robert could not process the words. Circle thing. The watch. Ethan had thrown the $4,500 antique watch into the toilet. Robert's voice rose to a near shout. "You threw it in the toilet? Why would you do that?" Ethan shrugged, completely unaffected by Robert's distress. "I don't know. I thought it was garbage. Then I flushed it, but it didn't go down, so I threw the box in too." Robert ran back to the bathroom. The toilet was now overflowing slightly, water seeping onto the tile floor. He grabbed the plunger from behind the toilet and began plunging desperately, trying to force whatever was blocking the drain to either go down or come back up. Claire appeared in the doorway, drawn by the commotion, asking what was happening. Robert could not even answer. Too focused on plunging, after 2 minutes of frantic work, something shifted. The water level dropped slightly. Robert continued plunging, and suddenly the blockage gave way. Something solid moved through the pipe. Robert heard it scraping through the drain. Then, floating back up into the toilet bowl, came the Omega Constellation watch. Robert reached into the toilet water with his bare hand and pulled out the watch. It was soaked, dripping with toilet water and waste. The crystal face was cracked, a spider web of fractures spreading from the impact point. The leather strap was completely saturated and already beginning to disintegrate from the water and sewage contamination. Robert held the watch in his shaking hands, staring at the destruction of 8 months of sacrifice. Water dripped from the watch onto the bathroom floor. Behind him, Claire's voice came out confused and worried. "Robert, what is that? What's going on?" Robert turned around, tears forming in his eyes. He was holding the ruined watch, dripping and damaged, and he could not even speak. Claire stepped closer, looking at the watch, trying to understand. Where did that watch come from? Robert, what's happening? Robert's voice came out as a choked whisper. It's your grandmother's watch. I bought it for you, for our anniversary. I've been saving for 8 months. I rented out our bedroom on Airbnb while you were at work or away. I slept on the couch dozens of nights. I saved $4,500. This was supposed to be your anniversary present. Claire's face went through several emotions in rapid succession. Confusion, shock, disbelief, and finally heartbreak. You did what? You rented our bedroom? You slept on the couch? She reached out and took the watch from Robert's hands. Looking at it closely, despite the dirty water dripping from it, her hands started shaking. This is Grandma Margaret's watch. This is an Omega Constellation from 1952. Her voice was breaking. Robert, how did you afford this? Robert explained everything through tears, finding the watch in Seattle, deciding to rent their bedroom, the 8 months of strangers in their bed, the back pain, the lies, all of it. Claire was crying now too, torn between gratitude for the sacrifice and horror at what Robert had endured and what had been destroyed. She looked at the ruined watch, water still dripping from it, and sobbed. Why didn't you tell me? I would never have let you do this. This watch is not worth what you went through. I don't care about the watch, Robert. I care about you. That was when Martin appeared in the bathroom doorway. Hey, what's all the crying about? Everything okay? His tone was casual, oblivious to the magnitude of what had happened. Robert spun toward his cousin, his grief transforming instantly into rage. Everything okay? Your son just destroyed a $4,500 antique watch. He threw it in the toilet and flushed it. Robert's voice was shaking with fury. Martin's face showed brief surprise. Then he laughed uncomfortably. Wait, $4,500 for a watch? Come on, Robert, that's ridiculous. Nobody spends that much on a watch. His dismissive tone made Robert's rage intensify. Claire stepped forward, still holding the ruined watch, tears streaming down her face. This belonged to my grandmother. Robert sacrificed everything to buy this for me, and your son destroyed it because you were not watching him. Martin's expression shifted to defensiveness. Hey, Ethan didn't know it was valuable. He's 6 years old. He thought it was trash. This is an accident. Claire's voice rose, sharp and angry, in a way Robert rarely heard from his gentle wife. An accident. He went through our bathroom closet, found something that was clearly not his, and threw it in a toilet. That's not an accident. That's destruction, and it happened because you ignore him constantly. Martin's face flushed red. Don't tell me how to parent my kid. You don't even have children. You have no idea how hard it is. The argument escalated quickly, voices rising. Robert demanded that Martin pay for the watch. Martin laughed bitterly. Pay for it? I don't have $4,500. I barely have $400. If you're stupid enough to hide expensive things where kids can find them, that's your problem. Claire pointed at the door. Get out! Get out of our house right now! Martin started to argue, but Claire's fury was absolute. I said, get out! Take your son and leave! Martin grabbed Ethan roughly by the arm and stormed toward the front door, muttering about how they were overreacting and being unreasonable. As he left, he shouted back, Don't expect me to pay for your mistake! The door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. The house fell silent. Robert and Claire stood in their bathroom, surrounded by water on the floor, holding a destroyed watch that represented months of sacrifice and a lifetime of sentimental longing. They held each other and cried, not just for the watch, but for the cruelty of the situation, for the unfairness of working so hard for something only to watch it destroyed in minutes by carelessness and lack of accountability. The following Monday, Claire called a family friend who was an attorney, explaining the situation and asking about legal options. The attorney said they could sue Martin in small claims court for the value of the watch. They would need documentation proving the watch's value and proof of the incident. Robert still had the receipt from the antique shop and the watch's authenticity documentation. For proof of the incident, they had the destroyed watch itself and could provide testimony. It was not a perfect case, but it was worth trying. Robert filed the small claims lawsuit that week, asking for $4,500 plus court costs. Martin was served with papers at his apartment. He called Robert furious, accusing him of being vindictive and petty, claiming that Robert was destroying their family relationship over a stupid watch. Robert told Martin coldly that if Martin had taken responsibility and offered to pay even partial damages, they could have worked something out. But Martin had refused accountability entirely, so now lawyers and courts would decide. The court date was set for 6 weeks later. In the meantime, Robert took the destroyed watch to a specialist in antique watch repair in downtown Portland. The watchmaker, an elderly man named Bernard, who had restored vintage timepieces for 40 years, examined the watch carefully. After 30 minutes, Bernard delivered devastating news. The watch mechanism was completely destroyed. Water and sewage contamination had corroded the internal components beyond repair. The crystal was cracked. The case had dents from being forced through plumbing pipes. The leather strap was ruined entirely. Bernard could replace some parts, but the movement itself, the heart of the watch, was original to 1952 and irreplaceable. Without that original movement, the watch was no longer authentic or valuable. It was just a damaged case with broken parts. Bernard estimated it was now worth maybe $200 as parts or a restoration project for someone willing to invest thousands in non-original components. Robert thanked Bernard and took the watch home. He told Claire what Bernard had said. They sat together that evening, the destroyed watch on their kitchen table between them, and talked about what it represented. The watch itself was gone, its value destroyed. But the sacrifice Robert had made, the love behind it, that remained. Claire told Robert that what he had done was the most touching thing anyone had ever done for her, that knowing he had suffered through 8 months of discomfort to try to give her that gift meant more than any physical object ever could. Robert held his wife and apologized for not telling her sooner, for lying for months. Claire forgave him, saying she understood why he had done it, even if she wished he had not put himself through that ordeal. The court date arrived. Martin showed up without a lawyer, looking disheveled and angry. The judge listened to both sides. Robert presented his documentation, the receipt showing $4,500 paid for an authenticated Omega Constellation watch, the documentation of authenticity, photos of the destroyed watch, testimony describing the incident. Martin argued that his 6-year-old son could not be held legally responsible for an accident, that Robert had been negligent in leaving expensive items accessible to a child, and that he personally had no legal obligation to pay for his child's accidental actions. The judge was not sympathetic to Martin's arguments. The judge noted that Martin, as the parent and legal guardian present during the incident, was responsible for supervising his child. The judge also noted that the watch had been stored in a closed closet, not left out in the open, meaning the child had gone through private areas unsupervised due to parental negligence. The judge ruled in Robert and Claire's favor, ordering Martin to pay $4,500 plus $350 in court costs and filing fees, total of $4,850. Martin looked stunned and angry, but said nothing. The judge set a payment schedule, $500 per month, starting the following month. Robert and Claire left the courthouse feeling vindicated, but not particularly hopeful. Based on Martin's financial situation and history, they doubted he would actually make payments. Their suspicions proved correct. The first payment was due on November 1st. It never came. Robert contacted Martin, who made excuses about not having money, promising to pay soon. The second payment came and went. Nothing. Robert filed paperwork with the court to enforce the judgment, but the court officer explained that enforcing payment from someone with no assets and inconsistent employment was extremely difficult. They could garnish Martin's wages if he had steady employment, but Martin worked sporadic under-the-table jobs, specifically to avoid such things. The judgment was essentially a piece of paper with no real enforcement power. By December, Robert and Claire had accepted they would never see the money. The destroyed watch sat in a small glass display box on Claire's desk in their guest room, a reminder of both love and loss. Claire told her teacher friends about what had happened during their holiday break gathering. The story spread through Claire's school, then through the broader Portland teaching community. One of Claire's colleagues had a husband who was active in vintage watch collecting circles. He mentioned the story in an online forum for Omega watch enthusiasts, a community of serious collectors who traded, bought and sold rare pieces. The story caught the attention of a man named Thomas Brennan, a 68-year-old retired investment banker who lived in Westchester County, New York. Thomas had been collecting vintage watches for 30 years and owned over 200 pieces, including several rare Omega constellations from the 1950s. He read the full story of Robert's sacrifice and the watch's destruction in the forum thread and was deeply moved. Thomas had lost his wife Elizabeth 2 years earlier to cancer. Elizabeth had also been a teacher, like Claire. She had also loved antiques and old family heirlooms. Reading about Claire's loss of her grandmother's watch and Robert's failed attempt to restore it brought back Thomas's own memories of loss and love. Thomas owned 3 Omega Constellation watches from 1952, all in excellent condition. He had acquired them over decades of collecting, paying significant sums for each. But Thomas realized something as he read Robert and Claire's story. He did not need 3 identical watches. They sat in a climate-controlled safe in his home office, rarely looked at, certainly never worn. Thomas had no children. His extensive watch collection would eventually be donated to a museum or sold at a state auction after his death. What good were these watches doing locked in a safe when one of them could bring genuine joy and healing to people who had suffered such a cruel loss? Thomas reached out through the forum to the person who had posted Claire's story, asking if there was any way to contact the couple directly. Within days, Thomas had Claire's email address, provided with her permission by her colleague's husband. Thomas wrote a careful, heartfelt email. He introduced himself, explained his background as a collector, and expressed his sympathy for what had happened. Then he made an offer that seemed too extraordinary to be real. He wanted to give Claire one of his 1952 Omega Constellation watches, not sell it, give it, free. He asked for nothing in return. He simply felt that the watch would mean more to someone like Claire than it ever would sitting in his collection. Claire read the email 3 times, certain it had to be some kind of elaborate scam. Robert was equally suspicious. They researched Thomas Brennan online and found him easily. Articles about his successful banking career, his philanthropy, his watch collection that had been featured in horological publications. He was legitimate, wealthy, and apparently genuine in his offer. Claire wrote back tentatively, thanking Thomas, but saying she could not possibly accept such an expensive gift from a stranger. Thomas replied insistently. He explained that he understood what it meant to lose something tied to someone you loved. His late wife's engagement ring had been stolen during a burglary 20 years ago, never recovered. He still felt the loss of that specific ring, even though he could afford to buy a dozen replacements. It was never about monetary value. It was about the connection to a person, a memory, a moment in time. That was irreplaceable, but he could give Claire a watch that was as close to her grandmother's as physically possible. He wanted to do this. He needed to do this for his own sense of peace and purpose. After several email exchanges where Thomas patiently reassured them this was real and not conditional on anything, Robert and Claire accepted. Thomas arranged for the watch to be shipped via FedEx with full insurance coverage for $6,000, its appraised value. He included all original documentation, service records, and a handwritten note wishing Claire and Robert many happy years together. The package arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in mid-January, almost exactly 1 year after Robert had first seen the watch in Seattle. Claire was at work, so Robert signed for it. The box was small but heavy, professionally packed with layers of protection. Inside was a vintage watch box, made of rich leather, clearly expensive even by itself. Robert opened the box carefully. There, nestled in cream-colored silk, was an Omega constellation from 1952. Rose gold case, pie-pan dial with applied gold indices, the distinctive star logo on the caseback. It was pristine, breathtaking, obviously well maintained by someone who truly loved these pieces. A small card was tucked beside the watch with Thomas's handwriting. "For Claire, may this watch bring you joy and keep your grandmother's memory alive. With warm regards, Thomas Brennan." Robert called Claire at school immediately, his voice shaking with emotion. He told her a package had arrived and she needed to come home as soon as possible. Claire, concerned something was wrong, left school during her lunch break and drove home quickly. When she walked through the door, Robert handed her the watch box without saying anything. Claire opened it and went absolutely still. She stared at the watch for a long moment, then carefully lifted it from the box. The watch felt substantial, real, valuable in her hands. She turned it over, examining the caseback, the strap, the crystal. Then she looked at Robert with tears streaming down her face. "This is real. This is actually happening." Her voice was barely a whisper. She sat down at their kitchen table, still holding the watch, crying openly. Robert sat beside her, his own eyes wet. They had been through so much over the past year. The sacrifice, the lies, the destruction, the legal battle, the disappointment. And now, from a complete stranger across the country, came this act of pure generosity that restored something they thought was lost forever. Claire put the watch on her wrist. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. She wound it gently, the mechanical movement coming to life with a soft ticking that filled the quiet kitchen. The watch began running, keeping perfect time. Claire stared at it on her wrist, watching the second hand sweep smoothly around the dial, and sobbed with a mixture of grief for her grandmother and gratitude for this unexpected gift. Over the following days, Claire wore the watch constantly. She wore it to school, where her students asked about it, and she told them simplified versions of the story. She wore it to the grocery store, to dinner with friends, to bed. She wound it every morning at her kitchen table, the same way her grandmother Margaret had done decades ago. The watch became a bridge between past and present, between loss and restoration, between what was destroyed and what was given freely by a kind stranger. Robert and Claire sent Thomas a long thank you letter, struggling to find words adequate to express their gratitude. They included photos of Claire wearing the watch. Thomas wrote back saying their happiness was all the thanks he needed, that knowing the watch was being worn and loved rather than stored in a safe gave him more satisfaction than owning it ever had. They stayed in occasional email contact, Thomas becoming a distant but genuine friend who checked in periodically to see how they were doing. Robert finally stopped doing Airbnb entirely. His back gradually improved over months of sleeping in his own bed again. The pain faded to occasional stiffness that he managed with stretching and better posture. He and Claire talked extensively about communication, about how Robert should have told her the truth from the beginning, about how no material object was worth the sacrifice he had made or the lies he had told. They promised to be more honest with each other about everything, even difficult topics. As for Martin, they never saw or spoke to him again. He made no attempt to pay the court judgment. He made no attempt to apologize or reconcile. Through family gossip, they heard that Martin had lost his visitation rights with Ethan after multiple incidents of neglect and that his ex-wife had full custody. Robert felt distant pity for his cousin, but no desire to reconnect. Some relationships, once broken by betrayal and disrespect, were not worth repairing. On their 17th wedding anniversary the following September, Robert and Claire had a quiet celebration at home, just the two of them. Claire wore her Omega constellation, the watch catching candlelight during dinner. They talked about the past year, about what they had learned, about how suffering sometimes led to unexpected gifts. Robert apologized again for the months of lies. Claire forgave him again, saying she understood he had done it out of love. They renewed their commitment to each other, to honesty, to facing challenges together rather than separately. That night, as they cleaned up after dinner, Claire took off the watch to wash dishes. She set it carefully on the kitchen counter where both of them could see it. The watch sat there glowing softly in the overhead light, ticking steadily, keeping time perfectly. It was just a watch, mechanical components and precious metal. But it was also so much more. It was a connection to Claire's grandmother, a symbol of Robert's sacrifice, a testament to Thomas Brennan's generosity, and a reminder that even when cruelty and carelessness destroy something precious, kindness and grace can sometimes restore it in ways we never expected. Robert wrapped his arms around his wife from behind as she washed dishes, both of them looking at the watch. Claire leaned back against him and smiled. "I love you," she said quietly. "I know," Robert replied. "That's why I did it." They stood there together in their small kitchen in Portland, Oregon, two ordinary people who had experienced extraordinary loss and extraordinary redemption, learning that love was not about grand gestures or expensive gifts, but about the willingness to sacrifice for each other and the grace to accept help when it was offered. The watch ticked on, measuring time, connecting past to present, reminding them that some things broken could be replaced, some losses could be healed, and some strangers could become angels who appeared exactly when they were needed most. So after hearing this entire story, what do you think? Was Robert right to sacrifice his comfort and privacy for 8 months without telling his wife? Should Martin have been held more accountable beyond a court judgment he never paid? And what about Thomas Brennan's extraordinary generosity? Would you have done the same if you were in his position? We want to hear your honest thoughts in the comments below. These conversations help us understand where the boundaries are between love and sacrifice, between family responsibility and accountability, and between justice and grace. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the lengths we go to for the people we love, and the unexpected kindness that sometimes appears in our darkest moments, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. We share real stories that touch hearts and challenge us to think deeply about what really matters in life. And don't forget to watch the next recommended video where we tell another incredible true story that will stay with you long after it ends. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes what we lose in one way gets returned to us in another, often through the kindness of people we never expected to meet.